Hello and welcome to SciLux, the podcast where we talk about scientific developments and technological changes in Luxembourg, as usual, proudly powered by Research Luxembourg and recording at the RTL City Studios. And in today's episode, our guest is Olivier Parisot, who is Senior Research and Technology Associate at the Luxembourg Institute of Science and Technology, where he sets and leads public and private R&D projects in many fields, really many. I have probably 10 bullet points here. But today we will mainly focus on AI, machine learning, and space sector. So as you know me by now, I'm very excited about all three. So I hope to have a great discussion today. Olivier, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Anna, for this invitation.
Before we started recording, you were really amazed about the silence of the place. And we said it's like watching the night sky, right? So tell me, let's move first into one of the nights when you watch the sky. How is it?
It's just incredible. You are outside, it's the night, no noise. Maybe you can hear some birds and you are in the dark. And what is incredible is when you are completely in the dark, you can see some faint light. It could be star, but it could be insect, like the insects that have light during the night. It's just incredible. And you are here, you are in the calm, and probably for meditation, it's just the good context. Huh?
But you don't meditate. You actually try to get something out of that moment.
Exactly. But you have just to be sit. You put your eye on the eyepiece. Huh? You have your telescope, which is directed to watch, for example, a star cluster. But you are well. You are decontracted, and it's just incredible, I think.
And then when do you sleep? During the day?
Can ask to my wife, but yes, I do not sleep a long time during the day. During the night, I watch the sky, and during the day, I post-process my image, so no time to sleep.
And when you close your eyes, you still see the stars probably, right? Because if you're always with the images, then it's very difficult to switch off.
Exactly, but during the weekend, I'm very tired, of course.
I can imagine that, yes. So I asked about all this because you're the expert. I mean, I've seen already many posts on different social media when you write about electronically assisted astronomy. So first of all, let's introduce our listeners to that. What is it actually? Because, I have this idea, okay, if you want to see the stars, you just take this old style telescope that you can buy in some shop and then you just watch the stars. It's not like that anymore?
It's like that, but there are some practical issues. First of all, the problem is light pollution. So when you are at Luxembourg City, for example, or Metz, or Trier, or even Arlon in Belgium, the sky is not dark, really not dark. You can see a bit of glow and something like that. And so the visible star, you can count them, but you can see 10 or 20 stars, but okay, it's really poor. You can do the same experiment in mountain, for example, in Alps or in Ardennes, Belgium. Okay, the sky is not the same. 2 years ago, I was in Jura, in France. I just looked up the sky, night sky. I was not able to recognize La Grande Ourse in French. Just incredible, because it's the most popular constellation. She was invisible because there are too many stars. It was just incredible. So, in theory, just a telescope is sufficient to watch the night sky, but in our region, near city and so on, it's clearly difficult to see the objects, the nebula, the galaxy. That's why we need some help. And one of the help is to use a camera, to use a telescope too, and just to plug them and to capture some image.
So this means that you're actually using a camera. So it's not just a telescope that is somehow an electronic device that you then later on can process the images, but you also have a camera with it.
Yes, today there is a camera. Or some technology are currently developed by some companies. For example, OVNI Night Vision, which is in France, and they have developed an eyepiece, a specific eyepiece, which is based on military technology, just to have an intensification of the signal. So here, you don't need a camera. Today, it's too expensive for people, so yes, probably in 2 or 3, 4 years, it will be more accessible. But today, it's hard. The easiest way to have a camera, you plug it, you have maybe a laptop or a Raspberry Pi, and you just have to see the image that are captured by camera.
Okay, first of all, what's Raspberry Pi? Because I assume not everyone knows that.
Raspberry Pi is a mini computer, really cheap, which is embedded in a lot of objects today. And they help to do some computation on board. And here, for astronomy, it helps to pre-process and post-process the image on live. So you can see an image live, which is more impressive than by using eyepiece.
Okay, so just walk me through it. So what it means is that you have the camera pointed at something, you have something that is processing this image, and then you see the image on the computer, on the screen of a computer.
Exactly, it's the idea. On the computer or on a smartphone or tablet. And in fact, the astronomy, the main idea is to capture light. You have to get a lot of photon, and you have to capture as much as possible some light to accumulate. Because when you are watching a galaxy, for example, it's a faint signal, really faint signal. So it's like if you try to do a night photo with your smartphone, it's really hard to have a good result. A lot of smartphones are unable to get a good picture during the night because it's hard. You have to push the sensitivity of the sensor. So you get a lot of signal, but you get a lot of noise too. So the image is not so great and you have to improve it. That's the same thing for astronomy and electronically assisted astronomy. In French, we say visual assisted. Yes, the idea is to get a result which is more colored. It's one of the problems. A lot of people are a bit disappointed by using telescope. If you watch, for example, during winter, you see the Orion Nebula. It's gray, it's blurry, there is no color because our eyes are not able to capture color during the night, so it's not so impressive. And by using sensor, you can get the color. Another thing is, it's not so easy for people during the night. For example, during winter, it's cold. So you have to wait, you have to check, you have to put your eye on the eyepiece. Some people have some problem to do the focus correctly. If you have some glass like me, it's not so easy. Another thing I think which is really important is when you are capturing some image. It's my activity each night when the sky is clear, but I take the picture and then I share it with people, with my family, with my friends.
And they're all like, oh no, one again picture. We don't want these anymore.
Exactly. At 2 or 3 o'clock during the night, so my sister received a message.
They all mute.
Okay.
They're like, okay, Olivier mutes now, not again at night.
Another galaxy again, so no.
Now, probably you already know who you can send it to. Yes. Okay, yeah. And so it's also easier to share the pictures then, you're saying.
It's really easy. Some people say, okay, you just have to take the pictures that are present on Wikipedia, or you can just watch the picture taken by Hubble or James Webb Telescope. Yes, but it's the same thing for landscape. If you are at Paris, you want to take a picture of Tour Eiffel. Why? Because you want, at this moment, to take a picture of the object, of the moment too. And I think it's the same thing for astrophotography. When I check my old picture several months ago, I remember exactly this time, this moment, because during this moment, I was thinking about something, maybe personal or professional, I don't know, but it's a piece of life, I will say.
Okay, let's imagine you're on your balcony, terrace, I guess, or you go so.
Yes, garden.
Okay, yes. Garden, yeah, and then you just don't aim like this. You have to know where to aim. Where do you start? Do you have a plan? Okay, today it's going to be this, or just like, oh, this might be interesting for today. What's the process here?
The process is easy because all the targets are not visible in the same time. For example, Orion Nebula is visible during the fall or winter. Laguna Nebula is visible during summer. So you have some plan and some software like Stellarium, for example. You can see exactly what target could be visible. And you have to find something which is in the good position in the sky. So, for example, in your garden and from your terrace, maybe you have some trees can hide the visibility. So you just have to find a good position in east, south, and you check and you see if it is possible. So you can start the capture, see if it's okay, and you continue.
Okay, so I assume that when you visit friends and when you visit the garden, you're actually checking is this a good garden to watch the stars?
Exactly. And I will go further to choose the location of my holidays.
Really?
I check the light pollution map. I check if it is possible to put a telescope somewhere. If the visibility is okay, yes. For my wife.
Big cities are not interesting for you at all?
When I was younger, but now, yes, it's impossible. I prefer to be completely alone in a mountain or in campaign. So, because there are 2 days during the day and during the night. So the holidays are longer. So
That's also very true, yes. You brought me into the mountains and the night skies. I just thought this is maybe a good moment for you to ask the pub quiz question that we have prepared for our listeners. And as usual, listeners, remember the answer will be only at the end of the podcast. So listen very carefully.
The question today is, according to you, how many deep sky objects can we see just by using an eyepiece and a telescope from a mountain or from Alps or Pyrenees or somewhere like that? So how many objects?
And we will reveal only the answer at the end, but I have to ask so that listeners also know, because maybe not everyone knows, what is a deep sky object actually?
So we make a difference between deep sky object and object coming from our solar system. So in our solar system, we have the planets, of course, Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn. In a longer distance, yes, we can see deep sky object like galaxy, nebula. The distance is very, very big. And we talk about deep sky, in fact. So it's not a precise term, but it's just to explain. When you see a star, when you see a nebula, when you see a galaxy, it's really, really far from here. So we speak about a deep sky object. Sometimes you can have some object like comet. Okay, comets are not considered a deep sky object, but they could be. If the trajectory is very, very large, it could be the case. And I must admit, at least we are not specialized in astronomy or astrophysics. Our domain is artificial intelligence applied on this domain, and especially to improve the image. It's the idea.
Okay, so if I ask you a question and you can't answer, it's okay. You're not a specialist. But can I actually ask cluster of stars and galaxies? What's the difference? I think that is something you could explain to us, right?
Yes, exactly. Just by using the appearance. Galaxies are easy to understand, so you can see some spiral, some form. The most popular is the Andromeda Galaxy. The apparent size is 7 or 8 times the full moon. So it's something which is really large in the sky. So a galaxy, it's like a spiral, I will say, but not all the galaxy has this form. There are several forms for galaxy. Cluster of stars, it's much more, an agglomeration of stars, in fact, something like that. Stars which are linked by gravity or not, it depends, because when we see something in the sky, we cannot guess what is the distance. If you see, for example, a galaxy and a globular cluster in the same picture, that does not mean that they are in the same zone in the universe. It just means that it's visible like that from your point of view, in fact. So after, some spacecraft like Gaia have built some catalog and with coordinates, galactic coordinates, just to know exactly where located this object. But from our point of view, when we just observe, we don't know. But we can see the difference between the appearance, in fact, of object. And another type object which is interesting and very beautiful, this is a nebula. You have a lot of color. It can be like a head of monkey, for example. It could be like a laguna. It could be like a bird. It could be something like that. It's just like a bit of poesy, I will say.
And the color comes from where?
The color comes from the composition, in fact, of the object, depending if it is hydrogen, sodium, oxygen, something like that. But you can imagine if you are in space, just here, you watch the sky, you have no light pollution, you are just in a spacecraft. It will be impossible for you to see the color, because in picture, we accumulate the data just to have something which is more visible. But for our eyes, human eyes, just impossible to see.
This is a very interesting point that you mentioned, the accumulation of data, because I also understand that sometimes when we want to observe an object, it's actually coordination of different telescopes together, right, to see something.
Yes.
So it's basically exactly what comes into play here is someone who analyzes the data and puts it all together, like you.
Yes. So we can accumulate data with the same telescope too. And so we can do that, and we should do that during several hours to get a good result. Because when you take some picture, again, I come back to that, but you accumulate some faint signal and a lot of noise. But the noise is random. It's something which is randomly located on the picture. The true signal is real and it's always on the same pixel, more or less. So what we are doing is just stacking. So we take a lot of picture, hundreds of picture, or thousands of picture, and we do the average pixel by pixel, the mathematical average of each pixel value, just to have something which is easier to watch. And then, so the noise, we increase the signal to noise ratio. Yes, it's a good term which is employed. So less noise, a lot of signal, and then you can see much more information of the image. For some object, for example, for the Andromeda Galaxy, in 10 minutes, you can have something which is interesting. With more time, it will be better, of course. For faint objects like faint galaxy, like the Phantom Galaxy, yes, you need much more time to have something which is beautiful.
And it also means that you have to continue developing the models, right, that you're applying in order to tell apart the noise from the signal.
Yes, exactly. That's why machine learning and deep learning is really interesting here, because we train a model just to apply some mathematical operation to remove noise. So to recognize what is noise and to remove it. If you check the picture which are published in press, for example, coming from Hubble or James Webb Telescope, of course, it's not the raw data, it's not the raw image. It's images that were post-processed during hours and hours by specialists to have something which is pretty. And a lot of denoising algorithm, enhancement, augmentation of resolution, a lot of algorithms like that have been applied. And it's the same thing here. So in the electronically assisted astronomy, the idea is to apply the algorithm in a fast manner, just to have a result which appear quickly. Maybe a lot of people we listen this podcast, they will say, okay, but it's just astrophotography. Yes, but in astrophotography, we take the picture and the night after or the day after, we post-process the image on a laptop, on a computer, and so on. In electronically assisted astronomy, the idea is to have live image. Mm-hmm. So we can do the two things in parallel. It's not a problem. So you do electronically assisted astronomy, you have a live image, and after you do post-processing to have better images, of course. But really the idea is to show something to people which are around the telescope. It's the idea.
So live image, this means that the algorithm has to be extremely powerful to run in the background.
Yes, powerful and fast. Yes, it's the idea.
Okay.
And it's the goal of the machine learning for astronomy project funded by FNR. And the idea is to have algorithms like that. And we have a lot of algorithms to do that. Yes.
Yes, and it's also, as far as I know, with your colleagues, you spent like a lot of time collecting the data for that, didn't you?
Yes, exactly. In fact, in every machine learning project, we have to develop and to design some deep learning model, but we have to get data. And for each project, it's the same thing. We have to start with data. So astronomy and astrophotography is my hobby. So
you don't mind?
Yes, I don't mind. So during the night, I get data, and during the day, I design and I train a deep learning model. A lot of work, but a lot of pleasure too. The idea is and was to have a lot of data. And it was published. All the image, I capture image during 1 year, a full year, from March to February of the year after. And yes, 12 months of image. It was not easy because sometimes you have cloudy night, of course. So you have to write a clear part of sky where you are able to get the image. And really my idea was to take image for a lot of deep sky objects. It was the idea. So I don't remember exactly the number, but yes, I have image for 200 objects. It's just incredible because it was with an automated telescope, but I was here to check the process, and yes, it's an amazing work. And all the data are public, so everybody can reuse the data, the raw data, just to merge with other data to have a beautiful picture. It's possible.
And we will share the link in the show notes as well, so people can go and check it out if they want to.
Thank you. So for me, the idea was to have data for analysis, but it could be used to have good picture too. It's the idea.
As some of my listeners might know, I am passionate about machine learning, so I do know what you meant when you said about the models and all that, but I think that not everyone might know. So 2 questions here. First of all, just the way it works. You get the data, and then you try to figure out which kind of algorithm, which kind of, let's say, equations can analyze the data the best so that you then get something that is denoised and visible for the people.
In fact, the idea is in machine learning is really to separate the work as task, in fact. So you have a task, for example, denoising, remove the noise. Another task could be increasing resolution. Another task could be changing the color, for example, something like that, removing the red, and some task like this. And when you have the task, you design first a data set to match, to fit to this issue. So, for example, for denoising, it's done in a lot of domain, in medical domain too. So you have good picture, you take good picture, and you add yourself, you add some noise randomly. So you add some noise, so you have a mapping between the good image and the bad image. And then you have to train a model that learns the transformation between the bad image to the good image. It's more or less the idea. So, of course, you have to build a data set that is realistic. So the noise you add should be exactly the same that the noise that will appear in the true image.
So it's not that you take some drawing, software and you just draw something and you make noise like that. It's a bit more...
Sometimes, yes, it's the idea. It's like a battle and a process. You have your data, you train your model, you check the result. If the results are not sufficient, if the quality is not sufficient, maybe you play with some parameter of your algorithm, or you play with your data. And very often, so I applied machine learning in a lot of domains, in e-commerce, in finance, in
agriculture as well, right?
In agriculture, and it's always the same thing. You have to play with data. Data pre-processing is really, really important.
We need to be careful with play with data, right? Because what we're not saying here is just come up with data. We're trying to use the real thing.
Yes, exactly. The real data, but to match the good things you have to modelize. Another example, in agriculture, one of the problems was to guess missing data. So, for example, you have sensor, and sometimes the sensor don't work. So you don't have the data. So, for example, the temperature or the level of precipitation. You have to guess this value. How to do that? You don't have the value. So it's lost. So a lot of technique could be used when you have an history. So you check more or less how was a time series, I would say, and you try to predict the value. Not easy. But you don't know if your algorithm is correct or not. The idea is to take time series which are complete, to do the gap yourself, and you try to guess the value, to predict the value, and then you compare to the true value, and you check if your algorithm is good or not. Voilà. It's more or less the idea. And for image, it's the same thing. So you have to apply some things. When I say play, of course, it is manipulation of data, but to have something which is realistic. And in our domain for astronomy, so the idea is to have images which are realist. So we don't want to add artifacts in the image which are not present in the image. The idea is to remove hot pixel, to remove noise coming from sensor, but we don't want to remove nebulosity. We don't want to remove some part of the galaxy. We don't want to deform the star. So it's a challenge. But the idea is to have a lot of algorithms to do that, and to have fast algorithm to do that.
And does it mean that you actually train the model on the picture of the same galaxy or the same nebula, or you use different nebulas to train the model? How does it work?
In my case, I use different, all the objects which are available in my database, I would say. Mm-hmm. It's the idea. But we can imagine to have one model per object, for example, but yes, you will have a lot of model. It will be strange, and you need a lot of data for the training. And just to give an idea, but to train a deep learning model for computer vision, you need thousands and thousands of images and high resolution images. It's a lot of work just to get the data.
Yes, exactly. And that just leads me to an interview I already had a couple of months ago with Professor Jamila Awada from the university about computer vision. And again, the same discussion, the data and the processing that takes so much time. And it's so difficult, isn't it? Because, of course, we journalists, we want to see the result, right? We don't want to see the Python program or R or whatever, right? And that's going to take time. And this is really like the moment when you say, like, it's not ready, we're not sure, let's see, we need more time.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really tricky.
It's tricky. In this case, maybe a word about our partner. So our partner is Vaonis. Vaonis is a French company that provide a smart telescope. So smart telescope are instruments which are entirely automatized. You just have to initialize the telescope. So you see where you are, latitude, longitude, and all the initialization is more or less automatic. And then you just have to select an object. So, for example, I would like to see. I would like to capture image for Moon, for Jupiter, or for Andromeda Galaxy, and go the telescope do the job with some parameters like smartphone or like a camera to take a landscape picture. So you can select the sensitivity, the exposure time. So some parameter like this. The telescope take automatically the picture, do the stacking, but you can do it yourself after just to have better picture by using a more sophisticated algorithm and so on. So you have the data and you can play with that. Vaonis is a partner in the Milan project and we continue to work together. For me and for us, because it's their business, but the idea is to make astronomy accessible for everyone. Before, having an astrophotography, a setup for astrophotography, it was just a nightmare. So I'm a geek, but for me, it's just a nightmare to install the camera on a refractor and then to check the focus and then to check if the mount is correct, if the tripod is correct. It's just a nightmare. And in our region, you spend 2 hours to install something, some cloud arrive, and then, okay, it's finished. It's just horrible. And with smart telescope, you put your telescope outside. You just have to wait for 2 or 3 minutes for the initialization and go. And if the cloud arrive, okay, you just have to take your telescope, stop it, and it's finished. But you don't waste time.
Yes.
Maybe.
You mentioned refractor, right?
Yes.
So I noticed there is a reflector and refractor. What are these?
There are two kind of instruments. There are a lot of instruments, but two families. One is based on mirror. In fact, it's like the Newton telescope, we say, the Newton architecture. So the light is reflected on a mirror, which is reflected in another mirror, and it comes to the eyepiece. It's the idea. Building mirror is not so expensive. It depends, but you can have big mirror for 5 or 400 euros. You can have a big telescope with a big mirror, and you can get a lot of light, which is really important in astronomy. And then, okay, the experience is satisfying. And by using Dobson, for example, Dobson telescope, you can have something which is portable for one human. You can put it on your garden, and then you can check. The other kind of telescope is using lens. To have a good quality, it's harder to have big telescope with that. And again, the size is important in astronomy. So really often it's to say that the best advice to say to someone is to say, okay, use a telescope with mirror because it will be more interesting to watch something. For picture and photography, it depends, but it depends of your financial mean, I would say.
But if you're interested in electronically assisted astronomy, then you mentioned Veronese, and you can also check, we will definitely share the picture you took that got you a prize, FNR prize. That is really, really beautiful as well. I think I always have it in my mind when I'm talking to you, where there is one of the telescopes that was created by Veronese, right?
Yes, exactly. The Stellina instrument. There is another one today, the Vespera telescope. So the diameter is different. The telescope is different, but the camera is really more sensitive. So you have a lot of more data on your picture. It's really, really interesting. And the portability is just incredible. You can take it during holidays. It's really easy to bring. So it's the perfect grab and go setup, as we said in astronomy, in the astronomy domain.
I was also thinking before when you were telling me when you travel, you also look for places for holidays. So how do you travel with the telescopes? You fly with them, or you would not risk that?
No, I don't risk that.
Okay.
Very often, most of the time, it's by car.
Okay, yes. All right. Yeah, I was just wondering.
Yes, it's hard to take to grab the telescope during fly. So, but it could be done. Huh? It could be done, but yes, I don't want to risk that.
All right. It just reminds me, we talked a lot about astronomy today, but I also know that there is another hobby of yours that you're kind of passionate about, which is running. And I just wanted to ask you about that as well. So here you don't probably, when you go running, you don't take a telescope with you.
No.
And because I wanted to tell...
It would be interesting to merge all these hobbies.
Yeah, it's a kind of good, workout. I don't know. Are they heavy? I guess so, right? The telescopes, the ones you work with.
Yeah. It could be several kilograms. So yes, it could be heavy, but it's the price to pay.
Yes, because before we solve the pub quiz question and kind of start wrapping up our episode, I was just wanted to tell our listeners also about something that I found personally very interesting, because I'm a runner myself, not a professional one, but I like it and I'm interested. And I know that you developed some interesting app that you can use for running. So tell us a little bit about that.
Exactly. So several years ago, I was interested by developing an app just to find tracks on some routes that are similar to the well-known course, in fact. So for example, if you are interested to do the Marathon of New York, for example, there are some elevation profile. So maybe you have a hill to climb, to run on the start of the course. So the idea is to compute the routes that are similar, that have a similar elevation profile to the well-known course. So, for example, around Luxembourg City, I have computed a lot of running routes which are similar to the routes in well-known competition. It was the idea. I did that 2 or 3 years before COVID. And I think it's just incredible because during COVID, it was with confinement and with a limitation of to go out. It could be a great alternative just to have some dream during running around the home, to say, okay, I do something which is similar to the marathon of, Lisbon or so on. But to be honest, during COVID, I was not so much motivated by the app. But I think I lose something. I lose an opportunity, probably. But the app is still available on the web, forerunner.com. Maybe in several months or years, I will continue.
Yeah. And it's interesting, because it's a kind of interesting way of using data and computing something and giving, some output that is not so typical, let's say, just like with astronomy.
Yes, and here it was just incredible to get the data, in fact, because you have to get longitude, latitude, elevation of each point of the map. So it was.
But you were gathering the data yourself, or is it data that you can actually get somewhere?
Yes, I get the data somewhere. You can have a lot of data by using app like or system like OpenStreetMap, so you can get a lot of data like that. The information are public, but after when you compute the running route, you have to store the data. You have to it's just incredible. I have gigabyte of computed data. It was, but again, the data was the most important point of the thing. The algorithm is interesting, but the data are mandatory. Really, really important. A lot of time spent on data.
And this is a very important point, and I can't just underline it even more, is that in this day and age, we're discussing so much, all these algorithms, AIs, analysis. We have to remember that whatever we put in, we get out.
Exactly.
And you can see that now with ChatGPT or whatever else, the quality of the thing really very much depends on what we actually give it.
Exactly. The quality is really important. And another point for me, which is important, is in fact the reliability and the possibility to get the data. Because a lot of AI models were trained in some domain, I don't know, finance or so. But we don't know if people was allowed to use this data. For example, for the Forerunner project or for the Milan project, it was the same thing. My idea was to have the freedom to operate. So to get the data myself and to pre-process the data myself. So no problem. The data are at me, so List. So List is the owner, but it was the idea to be free to use them. ChatGPT for me, it's a powerful tool, but it's a problem. It was trained on my website, on your website. It's an issue for me because I don't give the permission to do that. So I don't know if you did the experience, but you can ask ChatGPT if it knows something about you, for example. For me, it's just a bad thing. I'm impressed by the technology, of course, but for me, we should be careful about the origin of data. And I think the AI Act, which will be in place in, I don't know, several months or years, it's an important step.
If you're interested more in this subject, we talked to one of your colleagues, to Alexandru Adrian-Tantar, about exactly that. Yeah. Explainable AI, trustworthy AI, and everything else. And of course, the AI Act as well. So do listen to that one as well. And what remains right now is the pub quiz question. So what you asked in the beginning about the objects, how many you can see, the deep sky objects, right? In the mountains, we said.
So just to give some history, you can speak about catalogs. So we have different catalogs of objects, the Messier catalog, NGC catalog, Sharpless catalog. But just to start with the first one, to give the answer, Charles Messier was a guy which made the Messier catalog, which is really well known, with a lot of objects. And all the objects were visible during the period he watched the sky. And he listed more than 100 objects. So it's just incredible. Just he didn't have camera, he didn't have a smart telescope. Just with his eye. Naked eye. Exactly. And the idea was to do the distinction with comet. Because he was a comet hunter, in fact. His main idea was to filter data, in fact. Just to see, okay, it's not a comet because it's in my catalog. Okay, so M1, M2, M3. It was the Messier catalog. So we can say in mountain, you can see more than 100 or 200 objects. It's just incredible. When we watch the sky, we can see only stars, but there are a lot of things to watch. But our eyes are not so powerful. And with an electronic device, we can see much more data and much more objects, in fact, in the sky.
So yes, so stop listening to us right now. Go and check out all the telescopes we talked about and go and see the stars for yourself. Thank you very much, Olivier, for coming today.
Thank you very much.
And this is it for today. As usual, don't forget to subscribe, to follow us on all the possible social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever you find us, our website. And do check us out. Suggest new guests or any comments you have. I'm always open to your ideas. This was Silex, and my name is Hanna Siemaszko.